As we know, Thursday marked the day a year ago that the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic due to the coronavirus, and today is the one-year anniversary of the first stay-at-home order in Toronto. It's now officially been a year. When was the moment that you realized the pandemic would change your life? That's the question that the New York Times asked 27 people as this day approached. It's a question based on psychologists James Kulik and Roger Brown, what they called flashbulb memories, to describe the recollections that many people hold in the wake of collectively traumatic events. For example, 9/11, the Challenger incident, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. These are traumatic events in which they write that almost everyone can remember with an almost perceptual clarity where he was, when he heard, what he was doing at the time, who told him, what was the immediate aftermath, and how he felt about it. The flashbulb moment for COVID is less clear because it's not a single event, but rather a cascade of decisions, happenings, and headlines. When was the moment that you realized the pandemic would change your life? For me, it was the day the NBA closed down. And then within 3 days, every single major professional sport league closed down as well. And I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the full folio page of the Globe and Mail listing all of the enterprises that had closed down in just 3 days. I remember thinking to myself, and I may have said out loud, "Oh my God," although it was probably a more colorful metaphor at the time. "Oh my God, this is huge." Anything that would cause a government to issue stay-at-home orders and for businesses to immediately shut down with what must have been millions of dollars of lost revenue a day had to be huge. And only when faced with truly life and death circumstances of a global scale, when the cost of not doing so is life itself, would that happen. That's when I knew that the pandemic would change my life, our lives, forever. 1 year later, we know how true this is. First and foremost, the virus has taken more than 20,000 Canadian lives and millions worldwide. COVID-19 today is the third leading cause of death in Canada, behind cancer and heart disease. And these deaths are not just statistics. Many of us have experienced the loss, a COVID loss firsthand, and even more of us know someone who has. Secondly, COVID has exposed significant weaknesses in our health, social, and political systems. When the pandemic began, many of us clung to the notion that we were in this together, except today we know we really weren't. 70% of the deaths, 70% of all the deaths in Canada occurred in nursing homes, in old age facilities, long-term care facilities. And according to the Globe and Mail, Toronto found that 77% of all infections outside of nursing homes were in racialized communities, despite the fact that those communities make up only 52% of our population. COVID has spared no one in its impact, but it has impacted some more than others. And perhaps there's no generation that has been more impacted than this generation. Those people born in 2016 through what experts predict will be through the mid-2030s, what some are already calling Generation C, Generation COVID. Chaim Israel, the head of thematic investing for the Bank of America Global Research, is widely cited for talking about the impact of COVID on this generation. He, in fact, is the one who has given it the name Generation C. COVID is such a big mega event in human history, he says, it's going to have the most defining impact for this generation. The world looks very different to this generation's youngest members. They've not socialized or interacted with others, not even family members. There's so many grandparents that we know in our community who have not yet met their grandchildren. They've not yet met them. We've got children who have never experienced play dates. They've only seen strangers with masks on their faces. And they spent more time in front of a screen than any generation before them. Some experts are wondering what will happen when these children who've spent most of their lives in isolation are suddenly exposed to the wider world. Will they be antisocial, or will they be stronger? As we near the end, God willing, as vaccinations are rolling out, we ask, how do we proceed from here? What happens next? I imagine Moshe asking a similar question in this morning's Parsha. The Israelites had just left Egypt for Sinai, moving from slavery to freedom. Then Moses disappears for 40 days on the mountain. The anxiety of his absence leads the people to sin with the creation of the golden calf, and God is angry. So angry that according to the Torah in last week's Parsha, God wants to destroy the entire people. And it's only Moses who begs God and appeals to God's vain ego. What will the neighbors think? You release this free people from slavery only to destroy them in the wilderness, that God's anger is abated. Moses begs for forgiveness, which is granted, but not without the chaos of the destruction of the tablets of the commandments and the golden calf and the leaders of the rebellion. A shattered people, writes Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, must rebuild. The opening verse of this morning's Torah reading gives us a clue of how that rebuilding takes place. Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Moses then convoked the entire community of Israel. Vayomer alehem, and said to them, Ela hadvarim asher tziva Adonai la'asotatam. These are the things, the matters that God has commanded you to do. Moses' act of convening in this way, Vayakhel Moshe, is a remez, it's a hint. We hear in it a previous verse, for which this verse functions as a tikkun, as a repair for the sin of the golden calf. Vayar ha'am ki voshesh Moshe. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, vayikahel Moshe et Aharon, vayumei lav kum aseh lanu Elohim asher yachu lifnenu. They gathered themselves against Aaron and said to him, come, make for us a God who can go before us. Rabbi Sachs keenly notes that just as the sin of the Egel Zahav, the sin of the golden calf, was committed by the people acting as a kahal or a kihila, as a community, so atonement was to be achieved by their acting again as a kihila, this time by making a home, a mishkan, a tabernacle for the divine presence, as they earlier sought to make a substitute for it. Hebrew has three different words for community: Edah, Tzibor, and Kihila. Edah comes from the word witness, aid. It represents a community that has witnessed or experienced a similar event and have, therefore, a strong sense of collective identity. The word tzibor comes from the word to heap or to pile up. A tzibor is a community of people who happen to be in the same place at the same time, but may not know each other. But they come together forming a public. A minyan is a tzibor. A kihila, though, is different from both an edah and a tzibor in that a kihila comes together for collective purpose. A purpose that Rabbi Sachs says involves making a distinctive purpose. A kihila gathers together the distinct and separate contributions of many individuals so that each can say, I helped to make this. That's what happens in the Torah reading. The Kehillah of Bnei Yisrael, after the incident of the Egel Zahav, they are convened together, and we have the recording of what each contributed. The Nadiv Lev, the willing offering of every individual, what they contributed in order to make the Mishkan. Each could say, I helped to make this. As we reflect on this past year, there are many things, as there are many that were difficult, really difficult. There are also a lot of once unimaginable experiments that we have all helped to make happen. Experiments in care, connection, education, science, medicine, and more, that as one observer has noted, in spite of how difficult they are, they've worked out pretty well. We figured out how to work and educate remotely. We figured out how to enjoy professional sports in the midst of a pandemic. We figured out how to create vaccines to be developed and mass-produced in just a year. And as a Kehillah, we figured out how to maintain sacred connections at a time of physical distancing. We figured out how to continue to care for each other, especially the vulnerable of our community, those that are older and alone and lonely. We figured out, with the help of technology, how to maintain a minyan, how to find meaning in that minyan, how to celebrate B'nai Mitzvah and other smechot, including weddings. We figured out how to congregate and gather just for the purposes of maintaining connection and sharing our experiences on a regular basis. We figured out how to take distance walks so that we can continue to interact. We figured out how to visit at the end of driveways and in garages in the midst of winter. There is a lot that we figured out, a lot that each of us can say we've helped to make this year, though extremely difficult, at least bearable. We figured it out because in times of trouble, we Jews always turn to Torah. We always turn to our essential values, and we ask, how can we bring these values to life in the context in which we find ourselves at this moment? And so we figured it out. Sherry Fetterman, one of the rabbinic assistants, commented just the other day to me, you look at our bulletin, you look at our website, you look at the plethora of activities and engagements that Beth Tzedek is still providing, and you have to ask yourself, are we really in a pandemic? It seems, rather than slow down, we've ramped up. Vayakhel at Kol Ha'edah. We have gathered the entire community together. Of course, none of this is enough. And none of this is ultimately satisfying. Because what we miss most is Kehillah, is community. What we miss most is the ability to hug each other, to be in each other's presence, to share Shabbat dinner with family and friends and guests. We miss being able to be in the shul. I know that the cantor and I missed today having our full team together. My having to daven and him reading the entire Torah rather than davening is something that we miss. But even more than that, we miss the energy of a Kehillah singing together. It was lovely to have the Smith family here today. I could hear them for the first time in a long time, having people sing along with us. It added extra energy, but we miss a Kehillah. And we look forward to the day in the not-so-distant future when we can start being together again en masse. Until then, we know that in a couple weeks, The regulations are going to loosen a little bit as the weather is getting warmer, and we're preparing to start having both simultaneous inside live stream as well as outside services for those that we can host up to the maximum that public health allows, because that's how important Kihila is. The Torah gathers people together not just to say, I help contribute this, but also for Shabbat. Vayakhel, the first mitzvah that the people are reminded of, is the importance of Shabbat. Because Shabbat, as Echad Ha'am said, and as Iturei Torah, one of the commentaries, the Hasidic commentaries of this morning's Torah reading says, more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat have kept the Jews. It's that opportunity once a week to gather as a Kehillah, to share our highs, our celebrations of B'nai Mitzvah, of Ufrofs, of weddings, of anniversaries, of birthdays, but also to note and to comfort those who are ailing and who are suffering in our community. That's what Kehillah does, and Shabbat is the mechanism by which the Jews for a century have built community. That's what we long for. That's what brings us together and forms our achdut. And that's ultimately what we're waiting for. And it's coming. We just have to be a little bit more patient. Push our government, yes, to increase the rollout of the vaccines, but to continue to wear masks, to make sure we get vaccinated, to practice social distance, to make sure that in this last stretch of this marathon, we maintain our core value of pikuach nefesh, of the health and safety of the individuals of our community. And we will continue, as Rabbi Friar Bodson said last night, we will continue to sanctify the old, or to sanctify the new and renew the old, as Rav Kook said. Because that's ultimately what Jews do. That's what Kehillah is about. That's what all of us and each of us can say that we helped to create. Gam ze yavor, this too will pass. And bikarov im yirtzeh Hashem, soon, God willing, we'll be able to gather again as a Kehillah Kedusha, as a sacred community, not virtually, but in person. Panim el panim, face to face. Shabbat shalom.